The silence after her words said it all. Kemi Badenoch didn't just answer Keir Starmer, she unleashed on him in a way that left the entire house frozen. A moment later, Starmer stood up, grabbed his notes, and left. No final word. No counterattack. Just walked out. What led to this moment? And why did it shake the Labour leader so badly that he left in front of cameras, colleagues, and the country? It all began during a fiery session in the House of Commons earlier today. Parliament was already tense. The topic was supposed to be a scheduled debate about Britain's current trade and economic strategy post-Brexit. But from the start, the energy in the room felt different. Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, stood to speak and launched what seemed like a carefully planned criticism of the Conservative government's direction. He focused on what he called failures in leadership within key departments, especially those led by outspoken Tory ministers. Though he didn't name her at first, it became clear that Kemi Badenoch, Secretary of State for Business and Trade, was a target. Starmer accused the government of prioritizing political messaging over real outcomes. He said, "The public don't need ministers shouting across benches. They need calm heads who deliver results, not sound bites." Many saw this as a direct jab at Badenoch's combative public style and her strong online presence. He also mentioned rising inflation, slow economic growth, and inequality, pointing out that the very people this government claims to support are being left behind. Then came the turning point and Starmer looked directly toward the government front bench and said, "Some ministers think strong leadership means raising your voice or picking fights in the media. But shouting louder doesn't fix policy failures. It only hides them." At that moment, the camera caught Kemi Badenoch glancing to her left and then back to Starmer with a faint smile. It was the kind of smile that said, "I've been waiting for this," and members of Parliament on both sides leaned in. They knew something was coming. When Starmer finished his remarks and took his seat, the Speaker gave the floor to Kemi Badenoch. What happened next wasn't just a reply, it was the start of one of the most unforgettable political takedowns in recent years. She rose slowly, adjusted her notes, and looked across the room directly at Starmer. "Sometimes," she began, "silence is mistaken for strength. But let's be very clear, when the leader of the opposition talks about leadership, he should be careful. Because true leadership isn't about carefully polished speeches in front of cameras. It's about taking tough decisions, especially when it's not popular." The entire room shifted. What was supposed to be a normal back and forth had now turned into something far more personal and far more intense. In this opening exchange, the battle lines were drawn. Kemi Badenoch wasn't holding back, and Starmer knew it. But what came next would push him to his limit. When Kemi Badenoch stood at the dispatch box, the atmosphere in the Commons changed instantly. She wasn't just responding to criticism, she was setting the tone for something much bigger. And she wasted no time. Looking directly at Keir Starmer, she said, "It's easy to throw words around when you've never had to take real responsibility. Sir Keir knows how to criticize, but when it comes to offering solutions, he disappears." That was her opening shot, sharp, clean, and direct. Some MPs on the Conservative side let out audible oohs, while others leaned in. The Labour bench sat stiff, not expecting the argument to turn personal so fast. Badenoch then launched into a full-scale takedown of Starmer's political record. She reminded the chamber of his flip-flops on key issues, Brexit, gender policy, and internal labour discipline. She listed how, under his leadership, Labour had spent more time chasing headlines than laying out a solid economic plan. One week he wants to nationalise everything, the next he promises to respect business. One week he stands for one group, and the next he quietly backs away. You can't lead a nation if you can't decide what you stand for. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The precision in her tone was enough to hold the entire room still. Her delivery was calm, deliberate, and that made it even more powerful, but it didn't stop there. In a bold move, Badenoch quoted Starmer's own past remarks against him. She pulled up a line from an interview where he said, "Sometimes you have to speak carefully not to offend." She used it to paint him as overly cautious, a politician trying to please everyone but ultimately pleasing no one. Careful words may win applause from certain circles, she said, but they don't help working families struggling to heat their homes or feed their kids. People don't need another lawyer talking in circles. They need leaders who speak the truth and act on it. The House erupted. Loud murmurs. Some MPs clapped, despite Commons rules. A few shouted in protest. But the noise didn't shake Badenoch. She pressed forward, then came the line that likely pushed Starmer over the edge. She paused, looked him in the eye again, and said, "You talk about strong leadership. But every time there's a hard decision, you wait to see what the public thinks, then follow the polls. That's not leadership. That's fear." And just like that, the temperature in the room spiked up. Starmer's face, caught by the camera, was tense. His usual calm expression now showed signs of discomfort. His hand moved across his notepad, but he didn't write. He just sat there, frozen. Behind him, his aides exchanged glances. Badenoch didn't back off. She ended her speech with one final remark. If the leader of the opposition wants to run the country one day, he should first learn how to stay in the room when the truth is being told. Silence. Not a sound. The chamber, which had been rumbling with energy just seconds before, fell quiet, and then, Keir Starmer stood up. No smile. No comment. He collected his notes, nodded to the speaker, and walked out of the chamber. No explanation. No final word. The moment was explosive, and it was caught on every major news camera broadcasting live. A walkout that would be replayed, clipped, and shared across social media within minutes. The internet didn't waste time. Hashtags like #Starmer walks out, #Badenoch strikes, and #Commons clash started trending almost immediately. Pundits, supporters, and critics began asking, did Starmer just get politically floored by Badenoch? Or did he walk away to avoid a toxic scene? The only thing clear was this: Kemi Badenoch had delivered one of the most calculated, unapologetic political strikes of the year. And Starmer had no comeback. The image of Keir Starmer walking out of the House of Commons was as dramatic as it was unexpected. In politics, body language often speaks louder than words, and in that moment, Starmer's silence spoke volumes. The cameras followed him as he stood, adjusted his tie, picked up his folder of notes, and exited through the Commons doors without looking back. No nod to his party. No final statement to counter Badenoch's fierce remarks. Just a quiet, deliberate exit, leaving behind a stunned chamber. For a moment, there was complete silence across the benches, then the reaction began. On the Conservative side, some MPs exchanged smirks. A few even chuckled softly, not loud enough to break decorum, but enough to show they knew Badenoch had landed a blow that would echo beyond that room. One Tory backbencher was caught mouthing the words, "He's done." On the Labour side, reactions were more complicated. Several frontbenchers looked confused. Others whispered among themselves. Angela Rayner, seated just a few places away from Starmer's empty chair, was seen shaking her head, clearly frustrated but trying to remain composed, and then the speaker spoke. "Order," he said firmly, trying to restore control. "The leader of the opposition has chosen to step away. We will proceed." But no one was focused on the next speaker. The room was still processing what had just happened. The MPs quickly reached for their phones. The walkout was trending online before Badenoch had even returned to her seat. News outlets were already running live headlines: Starmer storms out after Commons clash, Kemi Badenoch erupts, opposition leader walks out mid-debate. Labour in crisis, Starmer leaves after verbal beating. Back in the Commons, a few Labour MPs tried to defend their leader in short follow-up speeches. They suggested the tone of Badenoch's remarks had crossed a line. One called it a cheap shot. Another argued that real leadership is refusing to get dragged into political mudslinging. But the damage had been done. The media frenzy outside Parliament built. Political commentators and insiders were already debating what this moment meant for Starmer's image. Some described it as a strategic retreat, an attempt to avoid turning the debate into a spectacle. But others called it the biggest mistake of his leadership so far. Meanwhile, Kemi Badenoch remained in the chamber, her expression calm, unfazed. She didn't follow up with any more comments. She didn't need to. Her words had landed, and the impact was already spreading. In the hours that followed, MPs from across parties began weighing in. Former Tory leader Ian Duncan Smith praised Badenoch's bold and honest words, calling them the voice of a generation tired of cautious politics. Liberal Democrat MPs, on the other hand, condemned the exchange, claiming both parties had lost sight of public interest in the middle of a power contest. But even some within Labour, off the record, admitted that the moment looked bad. One anonymous source told a journalist, "We can't keep walking out when things get tough. It makes us look weak." The Commons, by tradition and practice, is no stranger to heated arguments. But this one stood out not just because of the words, but because of what followed. Starmer's quiet walkout may have been an effort to hold on to dignity. But in today's world of instant reaction, viral clips, and short attention spans, silence is quickly filled by judgment. By the end of the day, his team released a short statement saying the Labour leader had prior obligations and had planned to leave early. But few were buying that excuse. The visual had already been burned into the minds of millions. Keir Starmer walking out, Kemi Badenoch standing tall, and in politics, optics matter more than intent. Outside the House of Commons, the real storm was just beginning. Within minutes of Starmer's dramatic exit, the internet exploded. On Twitter X, hashtags like #Starmer walks out, #Badenoch versus Starmer, and #Commons meltdown started trending across the UK. Mobile clips of the moment he rose from his seat and quietly left were posted, reshared, remixed, and even turned into memes. One viral tweet read, "Starmer brought a speech. Badenoch brought fire. And he walked away." Another said, "Imagine wanting to lead a country but not standing your ground in Parliament." The reactions were swift and divided. Labour supporters defended Starmer, claiming he had shown restraint in the face of personal attacks. They argued he didn't want to engage in Commons theatre or get dragged into political point scoring. One supporter tweeted, "Keir Starmer didn't storm out. He refused to lower himself. That's leadership." But critics were louder, and their message was brutal. Political commentators across mainstream networks didn't hold back. On Sky News, a panelist said, "This wasn't a debate win for Badenoch, it was a domination." And Starmer, frankly, looked rattled. GB News ran with the headline, "Badenoch breaks Starmer, real leadership on display." Meanwhile, BBC News took a more cautious tone, calling it a surprising moment of high tension in the Commons, and questioning what it meant for Labour's image moving forward. Even publications typically favourable to Labour, like The Guardian, were forced to address the optics. Their article posed a tough question in the headline: was this Starmer's Miliband moment? Referring to the infamous bacon sandwich photo that helped ruin Ed Miliband's public image. YouTube clips of the exchange were gathering thousands of views every minute. Political TikTokers were stitching their reactions over the speech. Instagram Reels had spliced together Badenoch's cold delivery with dramatic music, painting her as an iron lady in the making. Some even compared her to Thatcher in tone and presence. What really took hold, however, was the narrative that this moment could define the tone of the next general election. Why? Because for many viewers, especially undecided voters, the visual was hard to forget. One leader stood and fought with words. The other left in silence. Supporters of Kemi Badenoch quickly capitalized on the moment. Conservative MPs retweeted the clip proudly. One even posted, "Now that's what holding Labour to account looks like." Labour attempted to regain control of the message. A press officer stated that Starmer had prior engagements outside the House, and that he left as scheduled. But that explanation didn't match the footage, where his exit looked very much unscheduled and very uncomfortable. The fallout even reached beyond politics. Talk radio shows lit up with callers debating the moment. Some called Badenoch a breath of fresh air, while others said she was too aggressive. But almost everyone agreed on one thing: something big had happened. One listener said on LBC, "I'm not even a conservative, but I want a leader who fights." Badenoch looked like a fighter. Starmer looked like he'd given up. Others saw it differently, Parliament shouldn't be a boxing ring, one caller said. Starmer didn't run, he just didn't want to play her game. Still, the question lingered in the public mind, can a man who walks away from a speech handle the pressure of running the country? And perhaps the deeper question, is politics now more about moments than manifestos? One defining moment in Parliament, caught on camera and shared across every platform, now risks becoming a turning point in the race for leadership. The election isn't for months yet, but as voters increasingly shape their opinions based on how politicians look and respond under fire, this clash may follow Keir Starmer for a long time. Meanwhile, Kemi Badenoch's name, already rising within the Conservative Party, is being whispered even louder in leadership circles. If this moment was her audition for something greater, many now believe she passed with force.